All right. Next, this one I'm going to try and explain where we can actualise ourselves now. I'm going to be reading some interesting law synopsis. Very tricky stuff to read, very hard to find. But the way to get yourself out of this straw man world into a one of true freedom and liberty, you know, that's a big question. So I'm going to try and put this across. This is going to be a bit technical, so just bear with me while I go through this. But before, I just want to draw a map about how Captain Cook kind of sailed down, just say it's the east coast of Australia. And when Captain Cook came on the boat, I'm not a very good drawer, all right? He was Admiralty law, the law of the sea. He was a navigator. The real person who was patronising was Joseph Bank. He was from the Royal Society of Science. His job was about botany, empirical evidence, specimen factors. When James Cook, he was more under the Jacques Rosé noble savage sort of knowledge. He had a lot more heart for Indigenous people. But it was Joseph Bank's charter that financed the whole boat to come down the south. But while they're on the boat, Captain Cook, he was the Admiralty, so the law of the sea takes rule. When he comes in, he puts a flag on Botany Bay. As soon as he puts the flag on the land, 12 miles around that flag's called a port. As soon as he gets off the boat, he builds a house, he becomes a magistrate. Everything outside the port was the parish. This is the law of the sea. This is the law of the land. Very important to know the differences when I go through all this, all right? So basically, when you buy your land, what they've done, they put all these surveying pegs out there, they squared the land up. You go and buy land. Where you have your power is you have a title to that land. Your name is your title. What you call yourself is your right. Do you become an Australian citizen, are you a people, a consumer, whatever? It's your title. That your title connected to that land is that right, is your right. It's a right in rem. If it becomes a form of libel, it becomes a right in personam. If you go into a common law court, they're the two rights you've got. You've got a right of rem or a right of personam. You haven't got a citizen right. So you've got to know what entails a right of rem. Basically, the right of rem is your property, your thing. If you go into right personam, it's kind of like your ID, your copyright, your trademark. There's a whole different branch of conveyancing. As soon as you go off your land, the whole idea of the port, you know, when they come out here, we saw forest, so these guys saw timber, right? So as soon as they tear down the forest and they take it in the ports onto the boat, everything gets put down on book, gets registered, and if you want part of that chancery game of chancery, that's when you become part of the law of the sea. As soon as you want to put money in the pocket, you're in merchant law, under Admiralty law. If you want your land and you want to build a college, ecclesiastical law, then you can go through the church to build in the old days, because you're building something on your land. But as soon as you want to do financial trade outside your land, you get caught up in the law of merchant. Does that make sense? All right. So I want to kind of bit of Shakespeare here. Where did the law of international law of trade started? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. It was King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. That's when the Tudors took over the Stuarts. And when the Tudors came in, it was King Henry VII. He was the one who created a treaty of amity and commerce between King Charles VIII of France and King Henry VII. It was Henry VIII's dad. 15th of May 1497. That's when the international trade began between the two laws at sea. But what it is, on the 10th of September 1794, this is the interesting part, prize courses in British Court of Admiralty of proper measures when a ship, vessel, cargo brought in as a prize within their jurisdiction. So basically, if you get caught by the police, you're part of their prize and you get caught into their magistrate jurisdiction because you're cargo, it's your vessel, it's your vehicle, it's all merchant law name. When two powers at war, they have a right to make prize of the ships, goods and effects upon each other's high seas. So basically when the magistrate and the merchant laws arrest you, we're under prize law. You're an enemy of the state. So they're capturing your vessel and you're going into their courts. When property of the enemy may be acquired by a captor at sea, but property of a friend cannot be taken. So this is really interesting. If you want to stop the merchant law, you've got to show I'm a property of a friend, I'm not the enemy. And this is when you start showing your totem, your heralds. Alright? Because it cannot be provided if he observes his neutrality. Hence the law of nations have established itself through the means of condemnation of prize, the state of court and admiralty, judging by the such laws and nations, treaties. So what's happening right now when we've got international trade going on right around the world, it's kind of like all these admiralty courts, like the United Nations, there's a big admiralty court. So they're doing all these trades about who's got the right to send cargo from Australia to China. And it's the law of the sea. If someone comes along and doesn't play by that law of the sea, then they're a pirate. That's what's happening out of Somalia, or you're a terrorist. You're not playing by the rules of prize of condemnation. That's what it is. So what was happening in the old days, the French and the English, they had kind of like this honour among the navies. So they were to jump on a pirate's boat and they got all this cargo and they can't prove their paperwork where it came from, which is happening right now with terrorism laws. You know, they can jump on your assets pretty soon, right? You've got to prove your neutrality or they have the right to confiscate it. Right? This is admiralty law. So one of the things you have to do there is the common law master. This is how it's written in the old books. This was all written in about 1830s. This is the wisdom of the people in the 1830s. They kind of like foresaw what's happening right now. Common law master should be privy to the truth of the transaction in pre-paratio. If a seizure should be made without plausible cause, the captor is adjudged to pay cost and damages. So if you get caught, and if you can't prove it, by law you have to pay the damages. That's how bad it is. But if you're prepared to get arrested, that's one thing. You've got to get prepared for these guys to jump on you. And while you're prepared, by record, you can show that you're a friendly, you're not an enemy. This is what you've got to do when you go back to your coat of arms. I'm not the enemy, mate, because I'm actually a friend of the Crown. And by that, that's where you put your abatement on in a court of law. I'm fully aware that you guys are under the laws of nations and you're jumping on me because I'm a potential terrorist. That's from your point of view. I'm prepared for that, but I'm not a potential terrorist because I'm a friendly, I'm part of the friend. So where you go to your friendlies, you've got to go back to the church, the neutral party. Right, I'll explain a bit more about that in the next one. And how do you get from there? How do you prepare yourself from a citizen? How do you prepare yourself from the citizen of captured citizen to one of friendly character? That's a word. Character is a part of the law. If you're not a person, you're a character. Basically, when you draw your coat of arms, it's full of characters. So my character is a dragon, if it's a stingray, whatever. It's a character, that's what it's known. It's not a pretty picture, it's a character. So your friendly character is part of the Crown, because these guys are under the Crown, so are you. You're part of the law of land. So if you're prepared for that, they can't take you into their courts, because you can now take them into your court. It's kind of like it stuffs them up. Because if you show them that you are prepared by law to be friendly, and you show your Charter of Rights by giving them notice, this is my right, prepared, and they take you into their courts, then they can get sued for tort. They get sued for damages because you told them you're right, then they still took you into their courts. Then you can sue them for time and damages and stuff like that. We've got to get prepared because they're not going to offer a solution for us. All right? And what happens, the main person to do this, the main person to do this is a notary public. A notary public can go from the Admiralty, he can go from the Admiralty to the church. Why? Because there's a court where the Admiralty and the church meet. It's called the Court of Faculties. Has anyone heard of that? The Court of Faculties, its office is actually in, what I understand, is in St Paul's Cathedral. And what the Court of Faculties are, basically, they colonise a land, and the Admiralty and the church have got to know conclusively together what they're doing, so they're not out of balance of the rule of law, and that's called the Court of Faculties. So the Notary Public Office, he comes straight from the Court of Faculties. His job's to make sure that the Admiralty and the church don't contradict each other in the rule of law. One of the things with the Court of Faculties, I'll write that down, Court of Faculties. Right. One of the key words, one of the key doctrines that they came out between the Court of Faculties, Notary Office, is called Bills of Exchange. Bills of Exchange, and there's an act. And it is a doctrine, and it's an act as well. Has anyone heard of the Bills of Exchange Act? Yeah. If you get into big finances and you don't know how to get your head through the Bills of Exchange Act, then you're gone. All right, you really are. The way everything's closing down now. If you don't know how the Bills of Exchange Act, UK, works, opposed to the Bills of Exchange Act of Geneva, which is 1933, which created the UCC. If you don't know the difference between these two laws and finances, you're in a lot of trouble. You really are. Because these guys are working off Admiralty law of the sea. These guys are working off Admiralty law of the sea, but they're kind of checked it by the church. These guys aren't. This is how the Catholic Church are working through this. The Protestant Church is working through this. The big difference between the two, under the Bills of Exchange Act, there's one key word, there's two words in the English law that really made it most powerful compared to all the other constitutions of all the European countries. There's two words. It's called consideration and will. Free will. The big difference between the two, under this Bills of Exchange Act, you have to sign for consent. If you didn't give consent, where's my signature? Then you've got an issue in law. I didn't give consent to this, where have I signed for the Local Government Act? Under Geneva 1933, they work under obligation. You haven't got no consent. That's the difference, what's going on. Our Australian government, through Gough Whitlam, when he created the Australian government, they're working under this. We're obliged to follow this bullshit. But under the law, I said, no, I haven't given consent, where's my signature? There's a big difference between the two. If you've got an asset and someone's trying to take your asset off you, and they're saying you're obliged to take an asset because you're a good patriot Aussie, national identity, no, don't give me that crap, mate. Where's the consent? We're a monarchy constitution of Australia. We're not American Republic. Got to know the differences here, right? We're running this country like we're American Republic. We're obliged? No. By law, I'm not giving consideration. I'm asking some hard questions. Where's my consent? I haven't signed this. So this is my issue with the corporation of the Loddon Shire Council. They're a corporate entity. I said to the CEO, you're a corporate entity. He said, yeah, you're not part of the Constitution, are you? I said, no, we're not. Well, if you're a corporate entity, where's the contract? If I sign a contract with Telstra for their services on their phone, I'm obliged to pay the fine because I signed a contract. But if Optus gives me a contract, I'm not obliged to pay it, am I? Because I haven't got a contract with that company. So where's my contract with the Loddon Shire Council if you're a corporate entity, mate? Oh, it's a hard question, right? So how did they come into this? How did this corporation come in, taking our land tax, going right against the Bill of Exchange Act? Because this is all about finances. So this is where when Gough Whitlam came in 1972, he created the Australian government, that kangaroo and emu symbol. It's just interesting, this was the same time that Richard Nixon got sacked because he dropped the gold back standard. So if they're not backed by gold, what are they backing against? Well, they end up creating this thing called the Chicago Board of Trade. And so they're backing against your bond market to start this globalisation. So when you actually pay your rates, you're actually going into a bond market. Oh, I've got paper here. And that's why you got the kangaroo and the emu up there, because and it was the same time Macquarie Bank opened up, 1973. So it's Macquarie Bank's job to start privatising all the public assets. All right, it's quite interesting, isn't it? So you got the Australian government, it's just a trust company to create this whole new financial platform. Here's Macquarie Bank, and technically it is through this Geneva 1933 UCC. So you wonder where Hitler got all his power from. This whole new bills of exchange game went into Europe. It was cutting away something that was been going for centuries. The person who wrote the bills of exchange was a guy called Joseph Chitty. He wrote, it's kind of like the Bible, the bills of exchange, it's something to read. 1822, I think he wrote, and that's where you get Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It's all forewarning you about not to deal with the toy maker who comes out of Belgium. Something about Belgium. All right? It's really interesting, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, because the chit was the cheque, the original cheque, see? So the English Admiralty had a different way of doing Commonwealth commerce, equity around the world, before what really stuffed them up was World War I. Because what happened in World War I, before World War I, all the countries had their own treasury. They had their own kingdoms, they had their own treasury. You know, Germany, France, well, not so much France, Germany, England and Russia and all that. But when, after World War I, they created the League of Nations. And it was kind of like this big socialist financial platform. We're creating the League of Nations to stop all these sovereign countries that go to war. And, you know, it was run by a bunch of Jews, basically. So when Hitler came out, he basically said it was the Jews who created the war, because he was backed by the monarchists of the German monarchists originally, Hitler, before he turned on them. And he basically told them that, you know, who created the League of Nations. And that's why he got all this power behind the German front. And it was interesting, they had a lot of the Maltese crosses on the German Nazis symbols, which is backed by the Catholic Church. Right? This was the start of fascism. So this whole money game. And this is what's still wrecking us right now, because everyone's going through the UCC. No one wants to know the origins of it. They think it's just a money game. But under our constitution, we've got something by law that even can check the obligations of all these corporate foundations. So this is the sort of knowledge you've got to be prepared for. If someone comes and says we can, I say, actually, mate, first thing I've got to know is where's my consent? Have I signed this? Where I don't give this consideration, I have got free will to ask the charter of your contract. Is it connected to our rule of law? Because if it is not, then I'm allowed to check it. I'm allowed to go to law and see if it's a valid bona fide contract or not. Because I've got this UK Bills of Exchange to answer that question. If you don't know that, you'll not be able to test their metals. You going to ask something, Joe?
I was just checking UCC, Universal Common Code.
Uniform Commercial Code. Yeah. So one of the things is to do, how do you actually check, I'm saying this, but how do you actually give it action? You've got to give this sort of ethos of setting up a lex loci to a notary public, because that notary public, he's a very powerful, if a notary public sets up, looks at a business charter and he puts his stamp on it, because it's all within the custom and usage law, he puts his stamp on it, he's actually got high authority in a Supreme Court judge. Because he's a Crown office. They're expensive people to talk to. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this workshop, because your finances are not going in our pockets to go and start opening up this office. But, because we're in a lucky form right now, this fine gentleman over here, Jeff, put your hand up, please, Jeff. Jeff has got a Crown office. What's the name of the office, Jeff? No, come on, you've got a bit of Latin there, mate.
Constabularius Castri Nostri Diflobornem Magistrum Oprum Nostrum, which is bastardised English. How I would pronounce it in Latin, I will not know.
So basically, Jeff is an historian. He's got a Crown office on record 1383. Jeff's got a charter that goes back to 1383. Which is claimed. Now basically what that means, it's alive until someone rebuts it. Through this, instead of finding a notary public, through the Crown office, because all the knowledge me and Jeff have got, we can annex the knowledge of your assets under that Crown office. And we can do this deal with the notary public as a group. All right? This has been prepared, preparation. But when you come into this Crown office, because the actual office, it's called an office of Lord Hayden Palace, it's actually a palace. You can get some private time with Jeff, it's quite cute and funny. We're going past lateral thinking, we're going spiritual and we're going emotional, and it's an ecclesiastical church. In this ecclesiastical church that follows on, there's another workshop in here, but basically it's a Celtic church. Go, brother. Alright, it's a Celtic church. And they were called the Coldies, actually. The Coldie Celtic Church. The historic supremacy of St David's British Celtic Gaelic Church of God as recorded. There it is. If anyone wants to read the details of it, it gives you the history of it. It's all about Druids of high rank, and it's very Evans of Avalon, Missions of Joseph. It's very interesting. Basically, it's a documentation of ethos that you can put into any court. Someone has to rebut it. If they can't rebut it, we're alive and we're moving forward. The beauty of this church, of the Celtic Church, is that when Joseph of Arimathea came in on the Glastonbury, the Druids at the time were very close to their nature, Christ conscious in their nature. And when Joseph came on, they had no problem with that Christ story because it was very close to him. So when it went into Wales, the St David's Church opened up, and basically the Druids, the Celtic Druids, when they embraced Christianity, they were called the Coldies. And under this Coldie Christian Church, the priestesses, Druid priestesses become Christian priestesses with the male priests. There was a balance between the priestesses and the priests under Christianity. It existed under this church, something called the Church of St David, Blue Sapphire. It existed. This church was in action, law, before the Romans became Christians. First in time, first in law. This church is older than the Roman Catholic Church. When St Augustine came in, 601, Augustine came on the English lands and he wanted to bring in Roman papacy law on the lands. The British Celtic Druids said, no, we've already got a Christian version and we're not going to turn our priestesses into a statue of the Virgin Mary, mate. Right? That was the big issue. One of them. So what Augustine went to, he went to King Ethelbert, who was a Saxon king, not a Gaelic king. And Ethelbert, they murdered and slaughtered all the culty Christians. And that's how the Roman Catholic Church took power of Christianity in England. But in law, when it comes to Celtic Christianity, the priestesses are still in balance with the priests. So under this office that Jeff's got, of putting all your assets under the Jeff's office, we're acknowledging the priestesses. All right? I'm talking to the Aboriginal men about this because in the Aboriginal law, the women law is in balance with the men's law. They can dig this, man. The real problem with our society, doesn't matter about the money, the real power of our society is we've oppressed the women's spirituality. That's what the Roman Catholic Church has done. They've turned the woman into a statue of the Virgin Mary, and the rest has been money ever since. It's been property rights, priority rights, When Pope Gregory came in, Pope Gregory was the Pope after Augustine. You know, he wrote a book called the Book of Job. So what Augustine did, when he started propriety rights, he started to give all the Celtics jobs. There was no job before the Roman Catholic Church. We were sharing land. Anyway, it's very interesting when you start getting into the history of it, right? Because one of the things we want to do when we get prepared, when I'm going up to the council, it's one thing when you've got to show the court a remedy. You can go up to the judge and say, oh, Judge, that guy's wrong. And the judge says, oh, I know he's wrong. But have you got a right to replace the wrong Ross? You've got to show the judge the remedy. If you can't show him the remedy, then these bastards maintain, because this guy right now is probably administrating $250,000 worth of ratepayers' money. So if you want to take on someone who's got $250,000 and you want to prove it right, you're going to prove him, show him an administration that can handle that $250,000 accountancy firm. Or if you can't prove it by law, you don't win. You've got to show the remedy. If you don't show the remedy, you don't get it your way. And that's why you've got to know your story. You've got to go deep. And you've got to show that you've got to put up your standard and say, oh, this is wrong, this is right. And what you can do is something called a specific performance. If you can perform to the judge, I've got a 5-year trial of a community development, and this is a group of people we're doing, it's on the table, it's all documented, notary public stamped, you move forward. That's how you grow. You can't go up to the court and say, oh, I'm a victim, it's too big, it's whinge and everyone's a prick. Do you know what I mean? There's no future in that. How can a judge say, okay, everything's fucked, Ross? You know? You're not going to win. But everyone's saying, no, I've got a story, I've got a strength, I've got a memory, here's a group of people, that guy's wrong. We've come to an agreement, we want to do something right. You've got a notary public, you talk to the bishops, you get some people with a big crown. This is how you move forward with grace and good honour. It's a big thing we've got to do is agree to what we want to do. Big problem. That's a lot of workshops. But right now, the Admiralty's in power because you know why? They know how to administrate jumping on people. They know how to distribute the wealth. It's a pyramid power. You go into an Admiralty and he's got all these things like here, you know. So when you go into the magistrate court and you actually pay the fine, to me it's not a fine, it's a negotiable instrument. I went into a court once and I got a fine for $60 for a parking ticket. And the barrister said, well, What's the problem, Ross? Are you disputing you got the ticket? I said, no, I'm not disputing I got a ticket. Well, was it your car? No, I'm not disputing that. I said, what's the problem? I said, the problem is that you've used my name on that fine without my consideration. I haven't signed it. No one signed it from your part. I just get it from the mail to pay a fine. You've used my name without my permission. No one signed it from your side. It's not a legal document. Got into the county court and that. Barry says, I don't know how you got in the county court on this, Ross. This is the first person getting in the county court on the fact that I had not given consent to this fine. Because me, it's not a fine, it's a negotiable instrument. They've used my name without my permission. I can negotiate on that. Because in the Bills of Exchange Act, what happens is, why they capture you, the terminology of it is that you are something called a holder in due course. Why they got your name and you're sailing into their courts, and the court, when you go into court, the judges and the clerk of the court is the actual banker. The clerk hires the judges out. So when you pay the fine, the clerk is getting the money. So if you go from a magistrate court and you go to a county court, that's a different banking industry, it's a different clerk. So they'll love to have your business into their court. If you go to the Supreme Court, they'll love to have your business into their court. But the Supreme Court can fine these other courts for malfeasance judgment. All right? So when I went into the magistrate court, all my arguments in Latin, and the barrister said, his argument's in Latin, Your Honour, I don't understand it. And the judge says, I don't understand Latin either. And I said, well, that's not my problem, mate. If you don't understand law, it's not, what am I doing in your court? And he said, oh, you can appeal it to another court if you want. So I'll appeal it to the county court, that's all right. I'll appeal to that county court. So we're walking out, she went off her head, man, that barrister, didn't she? She went crazy. Because she was threatened that I was now going to take the law outside of her jurisdiction of understanding. And if I went to the county court, how I didn't proceed properly. It's not about the law. I didn't have a chance to present my law in the county court because I didn't proceed properly. They dismissed me. And I said to her, well, if I just go across the road and go to the Supreme Court and uplift it to the Supreme Court, I can do that. She says, you can do that, Mr. Drake. This argument needs to be heard in the Supreme Court, not in the county court. I said, all right. The barrister was really shitting himself again, eh? Because basically, if I won, I would have closed her whole business down. And she was a debt collector for about half a dozen councils right around here. If I had that one win on the fact that by law, why my name's on that condemnation prize, I am called a holder in due course. As soon as I say I want to question it, I become holder in value. All of a sudden, that $60 was my value, not theirs. You understand that? They had $60 on my fine. They had my name, Ross David Drake, $60, my life. And if I was to pay it, while I'm to pay it, it's called holder in due course. So once I've paid it, it's been accepted, the whole contract's closed, get another one, right? But as soon as you say no, I haven't given consideration to that, you're no longer a holder in due course, you're called holder of the value. That's my name, that's my $60. That's my value, it's my consideration. Now I can start asking some hard questions, because that's my $60, mate. You're allowed to do that. You've got my name with that $60, that's my $60, because I'm allowed to ask them hard questions. That's when it gets difficult to them. Because I'm allowed to prove my neutrality, see. And if I went and proved my neutrality and I went to the president, I would have closed their whole debt collecting law firm down. That's why she was panicking. This is where you've still got a lot of power. You know where your rights are, and you know where the res is, RES, and you know how the Crown can protect you. If you know how the Crown can make you a neutral character in this condemnation prize, then you have authority. Captures at sea, this is the real curly. This is one of This is the real perler. No one's ever put this one out in a common law workshop. Why it's called captures at sea. This is the Latin for it. It's called jury belli. Now basically, because the Aboriginals are beyond contract and they're not part of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia, that's why they wanted to be part of it, the referendum. But with the Aboriginals, they're beyond jury belli because they are protected by the Crown through the Island Pacific Act. Technically, by law, Aboriginals cannot be arrested under jury belli. There's a lot of Aboriginals in our court system, all right, because they don't know how to defend themselves. And it's called jury belli. And that...
Sorry, what's the literal translation of jury belli?
Yeah. The right of war. That's what it means. So what can balance it off? You're a neutral party. It's called a choose an action. One of the things you have in your rights is called a choose an action. You can choose your actions. That's a big thing too. I want people to write this down. This is one of the big ones. Choosing action. You get in the law books, look at your rights under choosing action. You can choose. We're one of the few countries where you can choose your action. Not many countries have that right. The Admiralty choose an action to jury belli, the right of war, to jump on people, condemnation. They ain't got the right paperwork. It's our prize. It's a prize at sea. If they do it on land, it's called a booty. So what can deflect this? There's another right of action, and we have this sort of right, and it's called, they say the right of war, it's actually the article rights of war. There's another article of air. Has anyone heard of the article of air? It means choose an action. It means the right of peace. Beautiful. I would suggest to the members of Rooted Raw that we set up Rooted Raw as a firm under the Articles of Air. As soon as you put up any Lex Loci ID, your choose of action under the Articles of Air, the right of peace, that's the abatement against the Admiralty Courts. That's revolutionary, man. This is in the law books. So where's the Articles of Air, the right of peace? It goes back to Henry II time. It comes out now and it's called the coronators. Coronator. What's it? Who's the guys who coronator, isn't it? When someone dies, they have a coronator court, don't they? That's right, isn't it? Coroners. No, coroner. Coroner court. The big difference between the coroner court and the Admiralty court. The Admiralty court works off of pyramid powers, the distribution. The coroner court works off as a council of people. It's a circle. That's the one. A justicia. Yeah, Corona Crown, yeah. Thanks, Jeff. You can go through the Supreme Court, Corona Court, there's a justicia. You can put all your assets under that preparation. If they try to say it's going to be a lot more harder argument to get your assets off when you start talking these languages. Because this goes right back.
That's actually the precedent, because they still acknowledge the Crown. The Crown. So what the Crown brings in, the Crown does not dispute.
So that's what me and Jeff are talking about. All through the Notary Public, we set up a Lex Loci financial platform. We set it up straight away under this coroner's court. One of the things that you can get out of a coroner court is someone really hits you, something called a lex fori. Lex means law, fori means fortified. A lex law is basically you can get a group of Supreme Court lawyers or juris acceptors, people of the Crown, to open up disclosure of this fraud. Someone's got to do it, and it exists in the Crown. The government's going off its rocker. People going up to the government asking hard questions, or you get this bureaucracy blandness, you know what I mean? No, wait a sec, mate, our assets are going out left, right and centre. We've got kids committing suicide, we've got people, detention centre, God knows that really, that's bloody concentration camps in the future. We've got all this evil going on right now, and everyone's asking these questions to the Parliament, and they're just like, you know, national identity, patriotism, be careful of terrorism. But Jesus Christ, mate, we're losing our assets, we're losing our future big time, and no one's capable. You go to the government, they're not capable, they don't want to know, they don't know how to do it. So the way is you go back to the coroner office. I've got some hard questions, I want my hereditary rights. I've got my children who have a right to inherit my estate. Your grandchildren have a right for your lifestyle. That's in hereditary rights. It exists by law. God save the Queen. Articles of heir, right of peace, go to the coroner's question. No use going to the Admiralty, no going to the magistrate, that's just penalties and fines. They don't know, they just want money out of it. They've got to keep up because they're a corporation too, they're in debt. It's bizarre, mate. So the Articles of Heir is something we are really keen to set up. One of the things I like to do is, if people want to know, when I talk to David, and if anyone wants to read this information in full, I'm quite willing to share it. All right? There's a lot of Latin in here. This is interesting. When property is condemned by fictional indentment of law, deemed by the property of the enemy. So this is what happened when the corporations are coming in and they're starting to take your assets. They're coming under durability, right of law. It's all United Nations now. United Nations just a totally commercial merchant law. It's got nothing to do with the law of the land. It's all obligation. And when they start jumping onto your property, which is not English law, it's United Nations law, it's just a fictional indentment of law, deemed the property of the enemy. This is what they call it in Latin, eo nomini. By on that name, the straw man. That's technically the straw man. Because when there's a straw man, a commercial citizen who pays the fines, obligations, right now, eo nomini. All right? But you, to knock that have, is something called a native character. You have a native character, where is it? It goes back to the family herald. I'll explain a bit more in the herald. So it has a right and rem. You got to go through the Supreme Court in this, not a state court. Reverts as soon as he puts himself, and this is one, in tenure. In tenure. This is really nice. This is law. On a journey. I'm on a journey. I'm on the way to the goods and routes to a buyer, just as I've heard, remain in his native country. So basically, I am on a journey. What's the Trade Practices Act? Free right to do commerce on the highway. Trade Practices Act. I'm on a journey because technically, if you're driving an automobile or not a vehicle, it's a different ball game. As soon as you're in a vehicle, they can jump on you because it's part of the merchant law. But if you're driving an automobile, they can't jump you. That's why you get a vehicle licence, not an automobile one. Because here I'm on a journey. In Intinere, but even though as a native character, when you've got a family right, just say you've got a heraldry right, your child, your kids, your grandkids are part of that journey of that family name. It's not lineal. This is all ecclesiastical. You know.
How do they deem you to be in commerce if you're on a private journey, like you're travelling?
When later on, are you on commerce or are you in equity? I'll talk about it in the next step. There's a difference between commerce and equity.
Isn't it true that all our registrations are commercial registrations rather than private registrations of our vehicles?
Yeah, that was part of the, I mean, it's a road corporation act, yeah, it's a corporation. Because that's one thing, when you actually go into court, you haven't broken the law, all you've done is broken a road rule.
Which is not...
It's not a law. You've just broken an in-house road rule, and there's big fines on that. Well, see, the trade practices out free right to trade of all King's highways. Next time you're getting a fine because you make a mistake. But it doesn't go to the Crown, it goes to the corporation. If they pay some sort of subsidy to the government because of the fine, so there's a big issue. How come our police force are presenting a corporation into a magistrate court? Aren't you supposed to be upholding the law? Huh? They're supposed to be upholding the law because they are a Crown office, they're not part of Parliament. There's an Under-Secretary who joins the police to the Parliament. The police are supposed to be upholding the law, not serving statute legislation.
The thing is that the Fair Work Act actually mentions that the police constitutes a magistrate's court.
Magistrate court is a police court. Yeah.
They're a Crown court,
But what I'm saying is the difference between Crown Parliament and Crown Police. There's a difference between it. The police are there to uphold the law. Parliament's there to create statute law, right? But if you've got a Crown law, the police are supposed to uphold the law, not serve a corporation to get parking fines. That's my banner anyway.
Fines are confiscated to the Ministry of Victoria, no longer the Crown or the court.
Yeah. Well, that's how everything's just been going further and further away from the rule of law. And it's really exhausting trying to find the paperwork with these guys because it's so tricky, you know what I mean? And these people have been educated. A lot of these kids right now going through law, they don't know it. I mean, it was Jeff Kennedy closed down the Latin courts at school. So you've got this whole generation, it's just totally commercial litigating law. Apparently there's more kids studying litigating law than there are practising litigating lawyers. That's our future right now. So these kids are getting, I don't know, 120,000 hex debt to get a law, so they're going to get their money back, aren't they? So they've got to invent new sub-laws that once you make a mistake, they can fine you to pay off their debt. That's what I'm saying. So wait a sec, these guys have got big laws, and they've got to create new analogies of what laws. They're not laws, just analogies. And as soon as you trip over, I've just done 5Ks over. Amazing. So that's what they're doing right now in the government. They're creating all these rules and regulations that make it really tight for you to be free. To do your own business action, choice of action. In the old days you're allowed to do it, but now if you do something out of their analogy of what it is, they can jump on you, apparently. But if you get registered up, if you get caught up in their registrations, but if you set something up that's on record, not registration, and you are prepared that when they come in, then you've got a right to say, no, actually, I'm smart enough, I'm not going to get captured into your sea. All right? I'm going back to the old history and we're setting something up through an old rule of law it's got foundation in law. So then it's up to them to rebut that law. They have to challenge you instead of you defending themselves. That's what we're envisaging. All right? But the main thing is and that principle, there's a good word, the principle of it is called post lim I closed my Latin school down in Kingallis and my Latin's not too good. What that means is the principle, it's a principle, post lim. The captured person's right of goods were restored to pre-war status when the captured person's returned. So once you're waking up, you want to go back pre-right of war. You have a right. I've just woken up. I'm allowed to go. The thing is, if you put an argument in the court post liniment and you write it up and you write it all down and you present it to the judge, that person has to rebut it. That person has to prove it's not law. If they can't prove it's not law, then you keep going on. So what Jeff done, he claimed this 1833 claimant, 1383. He's put it out to the public. No one's rebutted, haven't it? So Jeff's alive until someone rebuts it. That's pretty simple. And how do you do it? All you got to do, if you've got an idea, you just put a notice. How do you do it? You just put in a notice of a public newspaper. Public notice. Let it advertise for 4 weeks. And that gives just say, in Jeff's case, that gives someone a right, oh no, that's my claim. They can dispute it before. That's what public notice is. And if no one disputes it, then you go to a notary public or a QC, even a Justice of the Peace. And as soon as they sign it, because the Justice of the Peace is on record to the Crown, as soon as they sign it, on that date is when you become alive. Then you're in business. So most people go straight into the Crown Registry, see, because they think they've got to do business with the Crown, and then bang, off you go. Or you go through, you can do that even in small business, you go through the small business, you offer them to do the registration for you. So if you've got an idea, you just publicly notify them what you're doing. If you go through, use words like post-liniment, I want to go pre-war, I want to do all my exercise, which we can set out. Whoever's coming to want to take you into the world where they've got to prove your public notice unlawful. This is where you get your sovereign rights from. Don't wait for an invitation. Just choose an action. And another key word on that is inter vivos. Basically, that's where you can share your energies with other people, inter vivos. This is how everything was created from that simple public notice principle. When Australia was first colonised, there was no government, so this is how it was all done. The English, it was all done by people getting off their butts, free will, not want, will it, common will, understand the rules of the engagement, custom and usage law, treat it with respect, go through the principles and create it. We are the creators. We're not the whingers. Right? We're not the victims, unless you choose to be it. We are the creators, and there's the rules of engagement to create. Somewhere along the line, under the immersions of commercialism, we got too sucked in with commercial TV and watching sport and eating junk food. We just got fat and lazy and lethargic. And now we're all complaining. It's all too big. It's all too. Everyone's complaining. Everyone else's fault but my own. That's where we got to. You've got to get back there and realise how these guys got powers, because we gave them that power. Because if you don't do it, they'll do it for you. All right. Title. Just a title originally defective, being acquired under sentence of an impertinent court, secured by an intervening peace, was effect acquiring of all titles possession arising from war. To acknowledge one's title is to cure towards an intervening peace, acquiring from the possession of war. You've got to know your title. You have to know who you are. So the question is, like, a few people would talk to me out when I was having a bit of something to eat. They can't remember their hereditary ancestor past, you know. Well, it helps if you can remember, because it gives you more strength in the argument. And one of the things with Jeff, and you got with my friend Jeff. How many years you been onto this, Jeff? Since he was 14. I just want to show one of the letterheads that. So that's the sort of paperwork you need to come up on. See that seal, the watermark on that? It's got. What I've done in my relation to Jeff. That's my totem seal up there. Is the golden wyvern. So the first thing the judge will see is that letterhead, and because he's got that Latin cashmere, this is quite a high constable office. Supreme Court ruling can't adjudicate over that, because Jeff's office is basically about hereditary rights. It's not about commercial maxims. And then you have the seal there, the silver dragon. This is in Gaelic. So actually Gaelic's a lot more powerful than Latin in the court of law. All right, so the argument of this, Jeff and myself can take this into the Gaelic law. Because that is a Union Jack on our flag. Why is a Union Jack on our Australian flag? It's the English rule of law. It's going to have the last say in our courts. It ain't Jewish, it ain't Islamic, it ain't United Nations, it ain't American law. It's the English rule of law. Colonial Law's Validity Act, Section 5, points that. But the Gaelic was actually older than English on their land. Yeah. Well, basically, the whole thing with the Catholic Church, they were the ones who created the priors, and they were the ones who created propriety rights. All right? It's an interesting story how the Catholics took the power away from the Celts, how they took the power away from the priestesses. And it's a story around St Patrick. Try and follow this, because before, when St Patrick was the king of that time was King Lee, and their courts was something called Eric Fine, a bit like how the Aboriginals were. So there was a trial in our community. They used to get all the poets, they called Eric Fine, and just say there was a murder, and this is the story. They get all the old stories from all the courts, and everyone would hear the stories of how the past was to deal with this misdemeanor in their community. And the women were a part of that court, so they were the priestesses. And they were they had the song lines through them, the old Celtic ley lines and that. But when St Patrick came in, his magic was ink and paper. The Celts never had it, because it was all oracle. It was all memory. Their clocks were the standing stones, with the symbols on it, the Celtic spirals. That was their clock. But when St Patrick came in, he had pen and paper. It was like a real amazing magic. What's going on here? His ink and paper. They didn't know the consequences of that. All right? But when Patrick came in, he had a caravan of people. He didn't have him by himself. And his charioteer got murdered by one of the people in the Irish court. So in the Irish way of law, which is still like the Indigenous people here, they had the right of retribution. If I was to kill some member of Jeff's family, and it was usually the women's job, they were allowed to go at my door frame and they were allowed to scream hell onto my family at the door. Scream hell, because that was retribution. So when they killed St Patrick's charioteer, Patrick offered this doctrine that the Celts didn't have. It was called forgiveness. And so they wanted to know if Patrick was going to hell scream down on the family. He says, no, I'll forgive them in heaven. And they couldn't understand, what's forgive them in heaven? What's this heaven? What's this forgiveness? And they really couldn't understand that, but they incorporated this forgiveness into the Irish court. And what happened then, he started to write, and he had the ability then for this pen and paper to start to write down the stories. So all the stories started to become on record. Where there's a saint, there's a calendar. As soon as you write down the story, he put a date on it, the story become institutionalised into a book. And what happened, that calendar was they can use that story 80 years from now. So you said this 80 years from now and they can punish them. That's propriety rights. That's what the Catholic Church can do. And that gave power away from the women, because the women are the oracle story people. They're not lineal. So when the Catholic Church started writing down the stories and started institutionalising it, it took the power away from the priestesses. and become all male ever since, because it all become lineal, and it all become lateral, and it all become judgmental because we've written it down on record. Under the Articles of Air, we can get back to that. But that's going to take some deep meetings. Technically, the Indigenous people still live by that law. Because what happens in the Aboriginal law, the women, you see the men, they're kind of up front, but the women, they are the law keepers. And when they drop blood, it goes on the ground, the menstruation goes on the ground, and the men will pick up that red blood, a red ochre, and put them on their head. And when they're putting the red ochre on their foreheads, they're talking law, but they're talking law for the women. If a man wears red ochre and the woman didn't say that you could wear the red ochre, that man can be in a lot of trouble. So that's where we had that. Well, it was the Catholics that created propriety rights, right on record. Everything became an institution, because that story that came from Ireland got drafted back into the Rome, and Rome canonised it, and that's how they created all these laws right around Europe. They took all the good laws and killed the bad laws. Articles of War. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? When you can see how that is kind of like modernised to where we are right now. So when it comes to, I want to go, so what's happened, when you get the lion and the unicorn, that really came in power during King James I. After Elizabeth I died away, she had no heir. And James I, who was James VI of Scotland, came into England, and he was the one who created the lion and the unicorn. And he was the one who created the prerogative of the crown, and the one thing he really introduced was the Conveyancing Act. Sir Francis Bacon was the one who brought Conveyancing Act into the rule of law. There's some really interesting arguments between Lord Coke, who was the old English common law, and Sir Francis Bacon. They really hated each other in the courts. Well, Sir Francis Bacon and another lord called Lord Ellesmere, they were the ones who created the equity courts into the Crown. And what equity courts is, that's where you get copyright, trademarks, propriety rights from. That's where it comes, and that's what the lion and the unicorn's all about. It's basically on conveyancing laws. Patents, copyright, trademarks. The interesting thing is, that came out of Scotland. The unicorns of Scotland, it was something called the Order of Unicorns, came out of, it's a unicorn magic conveyancing, if you want to, not so much the lion. The lion's the law, but the unicorn's conveyancing. This came out of King James. King James was, at this time, was late 1500s, before he became, let's say, 1590s. Now, there was a dude over here on the east side of Scotland called Macquarie. Lord Macquarie! This is where it's really interesting. He had a seal, and it was like a castle. In God we trust. Around 1465, we found his charter. So he had a charter of land, which was Catholic. His charter of all that land was not this sort of conveyancing law. He had a different kind of conveyancing, which was Catholic. When King James came in, he closed down Macquarie's conveyancing law, and that what made this kingdom really powerful. And what happened under the Lion and Unicorn, under Sir Francis Bacon, he was the one who changed the law from Latin into English. Big power there. On the books. When before that, because you could use God as an argument in the law courts, but when they turned into the Lion and Unicorn, it was evidence of fact. If you can't prove it, then it doesn't exist. And that's all about propriety law, and that's just how the Lion and Unicorn created that empire. But it was just a prerogative at that time. King James used that as a prerogative to the point that it was really basically he was trying to copyright and patent all of England, and that's when the English Civil War came along and they cut his head off. But in the Act of Union and under Queen Anne, Act of Union, I think it was 1705, Act of Union. That's when the Law and the Unicorn and the Act of Settlement, when Scotland and England came together, that's when it became Bills of Exchange law. And from that, that's when the English started to rule, 1701. Rule Britannia. Anyway, Macquarie got smashed over by these guys. So it's interesting, in 1972, in comes Gough Whitlam. He gets rid of the Lion and the Unicorn, he puts the kangaroo and the emu in. And here's Macquarie Bank coming back again. All right? Macquarie Bank. Macquarie did? Yeah. So Macquarie's got this really nice Catholic background. In 1972 they create the Australian government. And this is why they sacked Whitlam. Because he started to borrow money outside this rule of law. He started to borrow money back into these private investment bankers, because this is when OPEC was coming in, or the oil barons. Didn't work. Another really interesting thing that was opening up over here, over in America, is called the Chicago Board of Trade. So what happened, because when the first time they tried to have a referendum for our local government to be part of the Constitution was 1974. He was the one, the Australian government was the one where our land tax was going in through local government, a bunch of CEOs, but that money was going into the Chicago Board of Trade. And we started to become a bond market. Because it was no longer backed by gold, the American dollar wasn't backed by gold no more, they created a new bond market. And that bond market was through this privatisation of banking of our land tax. Australian government was getting heaps of money, and they were starting to spend, a lot of people made money out of this. Bloody Packer made heaps. This was when the cricket was going off its head, get rid of the establishment, a big advertisement, a lot of colour, a lot of lights, everyone was making money. When the Labor Party came in, with Gough Whitlam and even Keaton, deregulating the banks, everyone made lots of money. You got a good time. Well, now we're going broke. That's a whole generation. We made heaps of money here, but now the books aren't meeting up because the books have gone foreign. And what's happening now, all these foreign books, they're all doing these, they're buying debt instruments now, you know what I mean? That's all they're doing. We're in this big debt. Just say we're under a $600 billion debt. Whatever we are. So who's buying the $600 billion debt instrument? It's the Chinese. So you wonder why all this Chinese infrastructure is starting to come in. It's because what this particular thing set up. We were all cheering it at the start. The bond, and one of the interesting things is, when it comes to the bond market, what creates a bond market, a corporation needs to have something, I can't remember what it's called, they need an annexation from the government that they will be promised 5 years federal funding from the government to create these corporate municipal council governments. If they've got government federal funding to support that, because they need at least a 5-year term, then the corporations can borrow money from these companies because they've got a 5-year guarantee, right? So when Abbott came in, he's cut that finances off the local government. The local government's no longer got a 5-year guarantee funding for federal government. These guys can't no longer get loans from foreign banks.
Well, they don't exist anyway because they lost out in the referendum.
Well, this is the thing with the referendum, see? They want us to vote these corporate governments into our referendum to justify the crime. Well, we keep knocking them off. The reason why, this is really interesting, why did the Abbott government cut that off? It wasn't because of bad policy. It was Howard government brought in this school chaplain scheme, right? Which really offended a lot of these right-wing Christian movements bringing in their Christianisation of their kids. So this guy from Queensland took that to the High Court on the grounds the federal government cannot directly finance non-registered government departments. They can only finance other public bodies. So the school chaplain scheme was a non-registered government department. He took it to the High Court and the High Court upheld it. Panic mode. Australian government took the High Court again and the High Court upheld it. Federal government cannot directly finance non-resident government departments. So when you go to our corporate government, these CEOs, there are non-resident government departments. So the government cannot directly annexate finances into a corporate government. That's why they can't, they said we're no longer financing corporate governments.
We're talking about local council.
Local council. So the local councils are panicking. This is what we're on the brig on, man. This is like, well, what's keeping this thing afloat? It's the only way corporate government is to try and put up the rates. But here's the Labor Party's put a cap in on the rates. they've run out of, they don't know how to count money. So me and Jeff went into Macquarie Bank some time ago, didn't we? As in, what street was it, Collins Street? We asked the main because we want to talk about our set-up trust companies. And when we went in there, they had the old seals, a museum of the old seals. Yeah, which was Macquarie Bank. And we went in there and they had the old museum of the old seals and the old ways they used to do it. We were like, great. Because the reason why we went in there, they were 1865. They were older than the Australian government. So we thought, well, they must know a bit about what we're talking about. As soon as we got in there, they didn't know, did they? They didn't have a clue what we're talking about.
They had the seals on display. They had the old one, which was the correct one, on display, with the corporate one down to the 40 mil, and that was the one they're using.
Yeah. So we're trying to tell them how to get onto the old seals, because everyone's saying, just in case, get prepared, because it's crazy out there, don't know. Going over there, anyway, like 3 months later, they collapsed. And we walked out there, didn't we? And we said, these guys don't know how to count money. Because everything's computer generated for them. If it's not on the screen, they don't know how to innovate. Right? They don't know their sovereignty or their strength to create. It was dumbfounding, wasn't it? We just went out there, my God. So we would tell them an innovation, free of charge. We'd tell them how to save their butt, go back to the basics, and they were like, you know. And we're going, geez, you guys are getting a lot of money and you're losing it. What I'm not talking finances, I'm just talking law. It says everyone wants money, but no one wants to know the law of money. Too hard work. It's a big difference. I'm talking to the CEO, the CEO of the council, he's rolling his eyes out, he doesn't know what I'm talking about. Is this guy Tyron, is he a local government? He's only a young bloke. And I'm talking to him about law and he's like, I said, my God, you're running our council? You don't know what I'm talking about? So, you know, it's a bit despondent. Like, one of the things with me and Jeff, we've got a lot of great innovations. We've got too many innovations, if anything. That's our problem. We've got all these great ideas and we've got all this knowledge and that there, but how do we make it applicable for the community? When
What you just explained, you've opened up another part of it. We can now do sovereign equity through the basic.
Yeah, I'm going to get that, Jeff. So he's full of pre-preparation, Jeff. Yeah, and that's what me and Jeff are doing. We are talking about just going back to the basics. The way to create community, the way is that just go back to the basics. Who are you as a family unit? Right, and just be content with that. It's all about wanting to be sharing in love with your future, being your children, your grandchildren. There's no independent individuals in this. If you want to be an independent individual full of wants and I want to make lots of money and go to the casino and that, well, go and play with the government. They want you. From their point of view, you're called a consumer. All right? If you want to make money and we want to get rich, go to the government. But if you want to create a commonwealth, all right, and that's the key word, isn't it? It's a common wealth. Because before a commonwealth, it was used to be commonweal. If you get a common will, we can create a commonwealth. not a common rich. It's an individual rich. And that's what's going to collapse, is your individual, independent, I've got my own bank card, this is too hard, I can get in the car and be up a highway within 100 k's because it's too hard. That's going to get crushed. Because the government's running out of money. And they're putting and all of a sudden they're going into India and China. They're opening up this middle class banking system in India and China. Our middle class system started in the 1880s, 1870s, 1880s, when all the gold was coming in. It was a upper class and lower class, and this is when Marxism came in and all these socialists came in, and everyone wanted a bit of the gold money. So we better get this manageable. A bunch of people called Rhodes Scholars came along out of Cambridge University, and they created this middle class mortgage belt. Keep people working under the mortgage belt. And that was, by law, set up in about the 1880s, fascinating history, and that's what Australia was built on, a middle class financial platform. So we've had it, and we've created colleges and universities to educate us on that. So all of a sudden these guys have picked it up and put it into the rice fields of China. Mortgage bad, but you can't buy nothing in China. So they're all coming here buying it, but they've got bank loans over there. Wow. So next thing you know, what's happening in Melbourne, the Chinese are buying all these office blocks, you know, because that's part of my building games, turning old warehouses and offices and that. So the Chinese got the money, they're buying it, but they don't know how. They're just buying it because they think they're going to get rich. But when you buy any property, you've got to offer this maintenance with it. You've got to create. They don't know how to do that because they haven't been educated. So one of the things I've been saying about all these foreign investments coming in there, they're buying, but they're not offering the service or the maintenance that creates a community around it. It's not their fault, they haven't been educated. You know, and it's the same with India. A billion people in India just going to have a mortgage belt thrown in there. Now the guys that are doing the mortgage, they're making lots of money. Lots of money. You know, I think Tony Abbott's signing off all these Chinese free deal dates, trade deals.
Well, that was the Saudis, they did their own birthday or office blocks, and they wrote it onto their books, and they didn't even let it out, so they were sitting there empty for 10 years.
Yeah, assets. And that's understanding equity.
Yeah.
So one of the things is that when you use common will and commonwealth, is that you've got to build on it. It's got to be built for your next generation. It was the English who created this. Everyone jumped on board. All right? So you've got to go back to the origins of the creators who created this equity, commonwealth. But one of the things with the English, the freedom of speech, and it brings a lot of people in, but now it's getting too congested. It's not right, wrong, and there's nothing racial or anything like that. It's just the factors of economics and laws. The basic, and I know it's getting too much. All right. So one of the things that we want to try and do is how do you go back to the basics. So before there was all the corporations, and this is what I want to talk about in the next section. We've only got 5 minutes. Is the trust companies. The importance of going back to trusts. And 3 things that create a trust, and I'll talk to it more if I can get through it because it's pretty heavy, this stuff. 3 things that create a trust is trust, faith, and confidence. I've been talking to my fellow friends of Root at Raw, and we want to create a trust company around trust, faith and confidence around this food product. It's going to be a prototype. We need to go to this QC, get all the paperwork right, get all the procedures right. We want to create a Futuro rule around it, make sure it's solid and strong, so when a corporation, insurance companies, foreign investors come and says you can't, we're saying actually we can. And they have to prove by law where we can't. But we've got to get ready that if you're going to business, you've got to get ready that someone's going to check you.
First in time, first in law.
Yeah, first in time, first in law. So that's why we're going further you can go back into law, the more power your argument is in court. one of the reasons we go into hereditary. So I'm just going about to break up. We've got a few books here if anyone wants to flick. This is a really good book to buy. Please flick through it. It's called Hereditary. Australia Book of Hereditary. You can only about $24-25. Please feel welcome to flick through it. It tells you the history of how to set up heralds and how you create your charters, because this means ipso facto, this is what you've got to present in court. You've got to know this. Your storyline afterward is your storyline, but you've got to be able to present your rights, representation of your rights. And that's something we'll try and talk in the next section, yeah? So feel free to flick through all that. And we can talk a bit about our root at law symbol, wherever David's gone. Any questions?
I have one about, that was published in the earlier section. You know when you said you were challenging the fines? And you said you didn't present or represent something. Why did it not work? And do you know what to do next time so that you can?
Yeah.
That's kind of a test of can you use this whole system?
Yeah, one of the things is when you go into court, you've got to know the clerk's the banker. And it is presented because when you really got to set yourself up as an office, someone who because when you pay the fine, and if you win the fine, the clerk's got it through paperwork, show the right procedure for that money to go back to your own pocket. And if you don't present that in the correct way, they'll stop you from doing the procedure. I went in to represent myself. So the next time, this is one of the things, so if someone does come up and test our metal, this is why we've got to talk to the QC, we've got to create a relationship with him, that if a big corporation comes up, he knows the corridors to do the right procedure, so it covers the clerk's propriety rights on how he deals with the public. Because he's got a, basically when you get a QC or a law firm, they are their own law firm. They've got a herald, right? And they've got a paper trail, propriety rights of how you get money from one court to his court or to his firm into your pocket. It's all got about paper trails. So I haven't got that. I'm just a layman bushy who says I've got a right. It's a bloody good right, but no one's reading it. Because I don't know procedure, and I don't know the honour of the institution of the courts, right? So that's why we have to be humble, be a wise man who knows his limitations. We have got a QC who's willing to represent us because he really understands this, he really digs it. That's the main thing. So we've got to negotiate, and that's where we're at present. We've got enough knowledge how to present this into the Supreme Court and who to present what argument and all that. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this workshop.
Did you say we do have a QC or we need to?
Oh, we've got one that's willing to meet us, yeah. He's a notary. But then again, he's got his own life, he's got his own rights and proprieties as well, So every time you talk to someone in law, you've got to, even now we're negotiating with each other. Do I dig this guy or not? 95%, 10%, whatever. Where do I fit with this? Everyone's got a right to negotiate their own stories, and that takes time to create relationships with people, and that takes this key word, trust. Yes, please.
What happens if Australia becomes a republic?
Yeah.
And all this, the Crown thing goes. What happens to all these laws which go back?
I think we end up like America. Because when it goes to republic, and the problem with a republic, it's based on administration and equity. And if there's no administration, there's no equity, like the French Republic, it's a bloody revolution, heads get chopped off. But while you're on the monarchy, we have access. It's not just equity and administration, there's all these other access we can have. Yeah, there's no successful Republicans. But under this way, we have ability to manoeuvre and shift. We can go, because basically I can go to another Republic, I can even go to the Archbishop of Melbourne and talk this around. So we can kind of like move around the sore spot. That's the beauty of a monarchy. If we turn up to a republic, I think we're run like a republic right now, but I think it's going to get a lot more violent. Because when America cut off the king's head, they cut off that access to all knowledge. That's my gig on it. I'm getting the cut off there from the cameraman. So we'll have a bit of a break for half hour. And there's some more drinks and teas and more desserts. Thank you.